Well, thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and spend some time with you all and have a morning chat with my dear friend Lou. So, Lou, thank you for being here and spending some time with some future leaders in our industry. So, listen, you started back in 1989 with Wilson Sporting Goods. You've had various roles in the sports world since then. Why don't you tell us a few things about the different roles you've had?
Sure, happy to do it, and thrilled to be here with you, Kat. We've been friends, and Kat was my boss for the 4 years that we talked about when she was leading the USTA, and to say she was a professional player probably doesn't do justice to. She was one of the greatest players in the world, much like you were one of the best interns we've had, Cindy, at the USTA. If we want to be technical about it, my career in sports business actually started with an internship at IMG with alongside Rob DeGisi, who's here in the room, back in 1988.
There you go.
I had read a book written by Mark McCormick called What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School. Maybe it's really popular here, but
I read that book.
And had gotten in my head that I wanted to be an agent. I love sports, and I felt strongly that if I was going to be successful professionally, I needed to work in an industry that I could be excited about. A lot of my peers back then were looking at careers in Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola. Now it's investment banking. Back then it really was brand management tracks. And decided I wanted to work in sports, was able to intern at IMG, very quickly realized I did not want to be an agent. Those jobs were tough, especially early on, but was able to get hired into a general management training program at Wilson Sporting Goods. A little bit of trivia, Wilson Sporting Goods was once owned by Pepsi. And Pepsi had a legendary 2-year general management training program. They would bring in MBA students and rotate them through, and the CEO of Wilson decided that he wanted to create something like that there. And so I was brought in to be the guinea pig for that program. And I spent 2 years largely in the golf group, rotating through different functions, and then I more or less stayed in their golf business, which back then was quite large in brand management roles.
So why isn't your golf handicap?
It's bad. Well, you play a lot more than I do.
There we go.
But they sent me to Japan. I ran the golf group for Asia. But what I will say is, while it looks like my career had a linear track from I started in sports and here I am in sports, the reality is I very quickly realized that working in sports, the novelty of it, and thinking that I needed to be in the industry to be excited and to get my best performance actually wasn't the case. I found the work itself really energizing and fulfilling, and trying to take market share and grow the business, and I was getting plenty of satisfaction out of that, and that freed me up to start to look at other industries. And so I left Wilson in 96 from Tokyo. My position was eliminated. And that was one of the transformational points in my life. But I came back to the United States and joined a management consulting firm that did a lot of brand strategy work for major brands: Nike, Pepsi, MTV, Frito-Lay, IBM, Best Buy, others. And I quickly realized that I did not enjoy consulting. Having run a business with a P&L and then being put into a consulting role where you're just delivering suggestions, for me, just wasn't quite as exciting. But I like the new business. I like winning projects and engagements and then letting others kind of run the work. And I think that was some of my father's DNA that, as a salesman, that took hold there. So I left there after about 3 years when the first .com, most of you weren't born, but when the first .com wave was striking. I was recruited to join a company that was launching a portal at that time, targeting college students to lead marketing and sales. We had a great run from nothing to publicly traded, billion-dollar market cap, very quickly back to nothing. But my role there, particularly in media sales, right? We were heavily focused on selling digital media at the time. Was really fulfilling, and I left there, joined Clear Channel Communications. Clear Channel now would have been what you think of as Live Nation, iHeartMedia, and then all the billboard networks, and was running a group there that was trying to sell bundled integrated media packages to big national advertisers for media properties that are traditionally very local buys, billboards, radio buys. It's typically the car dealership, not the big automotive company, but we were trying to sell integrated packages. Clear Channel sold off their units. I went to Time Warner to do effectively the same thing with a group there. Back then, Time Warner had AOL, Turner, HBO, DC Comics, Warner Brothers, People Magazine, InStyle, Fortune, whatever. Really had a massive portfolio and was managing corporate relationships with 5 of their biggest ad spenders: Federal Express, American Express, Home Depot, Anheuser-Busch. And started to get the itch to maybe go back to sports. I was working with the Turner Sports guys. I was working with Sports Illustrated a bunch, and started to get the itch to maybe get back into sports. And I was recruited into an opportunity to lead the sales organization for Madison Square Garden. And I left Time Warner to go do that, and loved that. That 5-year stint was true. The properties at the Garden, the Rangers, the Knicks. It included the Radio City Christmas Spectacular. The concert series was great, but then the U.S. Open opportunity came up, and I was not a tennis player. Kat can confirm that.
True.
But the business, I did not appreciate or realize how big the business of the U.S. Open was then. It's only gotten bigger now, but as I started to look at what that opportunity was to drive revenue around the U.S. Open, it was much more attractive to any of the jobs with teams and things like that might have been available. But happy to cut this answer now off here, and then happy at some point we'll probably explain what's different about the U.S. Open.
Yeah, but I mean, it's very interesting though, because when you talk about all the various roles that you were in, and which led you to sports or back to sports within MSG, what attracted you to the USTA to go into the CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, for the USTA, which ultimately was to get us to where we are with the U.S. Open revenue now. I was lucky enough to be the chair and president when you were there, and really took us to the next level, not knowing tennis at all. I mean, so it just shows to this group, you don't really have to know the sport to bring your business acumen to an organization that you're not really, savvy about, or to the sport that you're not that savvy with.
It helps some if you enjoy the sport and you understand the sports context. But what I will say, when I originally got contacted about the USGA role, my immediate reaction, or the U.S. Open role, my immediate reaction wasn't enormous excitement, right? I had been, but I for as big an event as it is, it within the sports business industry landscape, it doesn't get the attention that it really deserves. And a friend of mine who first approached me about it actually said, just take a deeper look. And I started to look at the business and was blown away at the scale of it. And the reality is the U.S. Open is a bigger business than almost every team you can think of, including the Knicks. If you look at revenue generated and look at profit generated off that event, with the exception of probably the Dallas Cowboys, the U.S. Open is a bigger business. And I started to look at not just the sponsorship business, but then looked at the global broadcast business. What separates the U.S. Open from most of the jobs in sports, which tend to be team jobs, running teams, the business side of teams, or league jobs, the fact that it's global, more like a World Cup or an Olympic Games, changes the economics. And so the revenue role at the U.S. Open was not really sponsorship. It was broadcast rights negotiations, which with most team jobs are happening at the league level, and then there's some regional broadcast deals that are being done. But broadcast rights, ticket sales, sponsorship, an amazing hospitality business, a massive licensing business. This year we surpassed 1 million fans. That's more than almost any team, with the exception of baseball teams, will do in a season, and that's happening in a 2 and 3 week period. So as I started to look at the business, I was like, wow, this is extraordinary. This is a bigger business than any of the jobs that I sort of had in my head might be next for me, and it has only over-delivered on that promise as I went through the process. It is the U.S. Open from a business standpoint, intellectually, it's a fascinating business to work on. I've stretched myself tremendously. We have great teams, great partners. It's as good a job as you could ever hope for.
Well, so as you mentioned, I mean, how many people did you say came this year?
We were over 1 million, 1,050,000.
So 1 million people, and 50,000, there you go. So with that, the U.S. Open generated, what, $500 million this year? Congratulations on that, which is a record. So that money that is generated from the U.S. Open goes back to the USTA and back to promote tennis in America. USTA is a nonprofit organization. So you look at the U.S. Open, which is a for-profit entity to support the USTA, which is a nonprofit entity. It doesn't really, calculate with most people in the world. How does that really promote and inspire the mission of the USTA to promote the healthier lifestyle for people into the communities?
The fact that we are a nonprofit, the USTA, changes everything about what we do, the nature of my job, the way we think about our job. The U.S. Open is the bake sale that funds the organization. And our work is not just to promote the sport of tennis, which might bring to mind, oh, you're going to run ads to promote the... We are, all of the proceeds from the U.S. Open get reinvested into equipment, into schools, court construction around the country, running junior tournaments, running adult leagues, supporting after-school programming that gives kids safe spaces to go to in underserved communities and use tennis as a vehicle to teach broader life skills. Everything gets spent. The U.S. Open replenishes those coffers, supporting elite athletes, juniors up through professionals that aspire to get to the highest levels of the sport. And unlike my experience in other professional sports organizations, where the trajectory was always to try to find a kid that played a sport, to develop interest so they might follow it in broadcast, with the highest level of evolution really being like a season ticket buyer. Could you move them along a pathway? They buy merch, they go to some games, they become sort of season ticket buyers, maybe corporate buyers when they get into later roles. It's flipped for us. The U.S. Open is a vehicle for us to inspire people to want to play the sport of tennis. It's the financial engine, but at the same time, we make decisions every day about how we price tickets. Our Fan Week experience now, which is the first week of the year, is entirely free. The reason we do that is it is also our platform to promote the game, encourage people to want to play. And so for us, we're trying to move ticket buyers and attendees and viewers to become players, not to ultimately become economic drivers in the sport. It's reversed, but it changes the way we look at almost every decision.
Yeah. Did you say a million and...
1,050,000.
How many of you were one of those 1,050,000 people there? There you go. Nice. How many of you were viewers of the U.S. Open? I said everybody's hand should go up in there, right? And how many of you actually play tennis? Thank you very much. We appreciate that. We appreciate that. So during your time at the USTA, what key transitions and initiatives have you seen occur within the USTA and that have shaped American tennis internally on American soil as well as globally? Yeah. I mean, you look at the key players that we have. I think this year we had 5 American men and 5 American women back in the top 5 of the world rankings, which is, successful since 20 years? Yeah. So what have you seen change since you've been involved with the USTA?
Well, you're probably more of an expert opinion on that subject, and so I'll give my response, and then you can tell me where I'm wrong. But we are experiencing great success at the professional levels right now, success we've not seen since probably 96, 97. And you mentioned 5 players in the top 20 on the men's side. Similarly, on the women's side, Taylor Fritz now in the top 10, 2 women in the top 10 as well. It's a function of so many things, and the USTA is not in any way, shape, or form singularly responsible, unlike maybe some federations in smaller nations. There is a huge ecosystem around tennis development that includes private coaches, includes our 17 sections around the country, but some of the levers that I think are particularly important that are coming into play here, competitive activities. As much as you think about player development, you think about coaching and training, but in tennis in particular, having the appropriate competitive activities, right? Competition, a pathway for competition, whether it be a junior tournament circuit, a developmental tour, or a minor league sort of professional transition tour circuit, where you can hone your craft, is so important. And we've made big investments over the past decade or more into making sure that we had robust opportunities for those athletes to progress. I think the other thing, and you could speak to this better than I even would, there's something about the collective. Athletes push each other. And when you grow up playing against, and many of our athletes are all in similar age groups, when you grow up playing against the same players and one of them has a breakthrough, all of a sudden it starts to make that goal more attainable. And so they push each other. So Francis is pushing Tommy Paul, is pushing Taylor Fritz, and then Ben Shelton cracks in, or Coco cracks in and gets supported by Pegula and others. And I think there's a dynamic, we see it now with Italian players as well, there's a dynamic where the collective sort of matters. But I don't ever want to try to claim credit, USGA credit, for the success that the athletes are having. We try to build an ecosystem that can support elite athletes in large enough quantities that they can challenge and push and elevate each other, but the athletes separate themselves. But I know you're the moderator, but I would love maybe for you to sort of add to that a little bit.
Well, you've answered it on the competitive side. I think you're absolutely right with the players been pushing one another. They've grown up together, they've competed together, they've traveled together, and I think the camaraderie has been a lot stronger with this crop of players than when I was playing. We were more, we were not friendly. Yeah. Traveling around because we didn't have that opportunity to really travel together the way this crop of players, this group, in particular on the boys and the men, boys and girls that are now men and women that have been able to train with our national campus in the last few years, that they've gone down and trained together, both in Florida as well as when we had our West Coast campus. We didn't have that when I was on tour so much. So I think that has played a big key role in this group that have ascended together, more so back in the in the 80s and 90s when I was on tour. Yeah. So
the other observation I'll make, which I think is more applicable to some of the younger players coming through in that group, which is interesting as we sit here at a university, the college pathway now has become a viable route to professional tennis, whereas years ago, and I hope no one takes offense to this, and you played college tennis, yeah. Whereas years ago it was sort of, the gospel was college is where you went to get worse, not necessarily to get better. If you were really a promising sort of prospect, you were encouraged to bypass college. And there are many that broke through, Katrina, Todd Martin, many that came through.
The facilities have gotten better.
But now it's night and day. Now you see players going to college, getting better, the facilities, the coaching, and the competition that you face during that, because you have so many international players now playing college tennis. It is a legitimate pathway, and in many respects, an accelerant to development, which changes the way we think about our role. How do we leverage that infrastructure of great coaching and resources, facilities? We can never produce enough courts and facilities to support all of that talent, and now you've got this infrastructure, and I'm sure at some point today, NIL will come up in a conversation somewhere. The implications of NIL on college tennis are something we're obviously very concerned.
Why don't you just quickly touch on the growth of community tennis? Yeah. I mean, the number of players have grown also in America.
Yeah, so we're talking this morning largely about the U.S. Open revenue, and this is a sports business conference and a sports business club. But the big change for me when I left the revenue position and moved into the CEO position is I'm spending probably 75% of my time now thinking about how we grow tennis participation in the United States. I'm thinking about the same way we thought about how we grow the business of the U.S. Open, but my focus and ultimately our organization focus is broad-based player participation. There are many federations that are focused on gold medals. There are many that are focused on supporting elite athletes, but for us, the primary goal is we want to grow broad-based tennis participation and drive that number up. And I'm thrilled to say that, in fact, I'm going to give you some news that you're probably not even aware of yet. Not only have we now had 5 consecutive years of participation growth, and my first 10 years in the organization, tennis was fairly flat at 17, 18 million, would bounce back and forth. We will surpass 25 million players in the United States this year, 6% growth year on year from a participation standpoint. A lot of it started with COVID. Tennis was the ideal social distant outdoor sport, but those players haven't left, and what we're seeing is actually more players coming back to the game that have been lapsed for 5 or 10 years. So the sport is growing. That is the focus. The sport is growing, and it changes the conversations that we're now having in the office. Very different than the conversations we had in the boardroom when you were leading those. Now we're talking about how do we get more courts in America because the infrastructure can't support the goals that we have. How do we get more coaching in America because the coaching ecosystem is not large enough to support the number of players in it, and it's all driven by growth, and the sport has had a boom. And for those of you that hear pickleball has had extraordinary growth as well, but it's not coming out of tennis play. In fact, they're playing both. It is not a zero-sum proposition.
Well, that leads me to my next question.
Yeah.
Transitioning from CRO for 12 years into your CEO role, what are some of the responsibilities that are different from your CRO role, and how do you see that? Is there anything that you're missing from being the Chief Revenue Officer as your CEO?
I'll say this. We probably had this conversation a couple times. The old job was more fun than the new job. I enjoy what I'm doing now, but that old leading the commercial side of the US Open was an incredible opportunity. It is a great business. And within our organization, we had a lot more control and ability to act quickly and chase opportunities and make investments and do things. In the CEO position now, again, my time is more focused on participation growth. We've got a great business team leading the commercial side. I weigh in there where necessary, but I'm thinking and spending much more time about how we grow, how we support athletes, how we get more courts built, how we get more coaches attracted to the sport. And at the same time, the piece that I really enjoy is thinking about how we improve the organization. And for us, the organization is not just the national staff. We also have 17 sections that are independent. It's a bit like a league with teams. We have 17 sections, and they have a staff that is actually larger than our national staff. And then behind that, we have thousands of volunteers, and that's how you came into the organization. Thousands of volunteers and boards and committees that provide so much value, but we all need to be working sort of in concert with one another. And historically, I'm not sure we were always great at that. So thinking about the organizational aspect of how do we set ourselves up to take advantage of the levels and the tiers and the structures that we have to deliver and get everyone aligned against growing participation, more courts, more coaches, better player retention is the piece that is very different than what I was doing. And as you know, the stakeholder management aspect of each section requires attention. They have their own boards, require attention. The players require attention and want to be heard. There are so many stakeholders in the tennis universe that demand attention. At the US Open, if there was something we wanted to pursue and it was complicated, but it was important, we could do it. If it was complicated without a big return, it was very easy to just say not worth the work or not worth the effort. On the participation side of the house, everything is important, complicated or not, because there are important stakeholders attached to all of it. So it's very hard to dismiss things and only focus on the biggest things because there are key stakeholders. It may profile a bit more like a conference commissioner than a league commissioner, if you will, because your stakeholder universe is so vast.
Right. Do you have any immediate goals for the USTA and/or the US Open in the next 5 years? I mean, you talk about the growth, 25 million right now. Is there a number that we're trying to reach with USTA? And when we look at the US Open and the transformation, are there any developments or ideas or opportunities for the site or revenue? I mean, $500 million, et cetera.
Yeah, so absolutely, and I think that's part of my coming into this role with more of a business mindset. I think has been very much about setting goals and identifying priorities and putting our resources there. You know, we're joking about the million fan, but when you were in that role, that was a goal we set going back to 2018, 2019. And at that time, nobody thought it was possible. We were in the high 600, 700,000 fans, and no one thought it was achievable, but that wasn't the question we were asking. The question was, what would it take to get to 1 million fans? And the way we solved for that was adding this week before, turning Fan Week, the practice week, and the qualifying tournament into something with real value. That conversation never happens if the task is, how do you grow attendance 5% next year? And so on the community tennis side of the house now, which is sort of what we label our participation efforts, we have set an incredibly ambitious goal. We have identified the desire to become the most popular tennis playing nation in the world by 2035. That would equate to 10% of the public playing tennis. There is no other nation that has 10% of their public playing tennis. The numbers happen to equate, we did some rounding to make it sexier, 35 million by 2035. But, as I've just released here, we will exceed 25 million players. So a long way to go. But what that goal allows us to do is to really start to think about what are the conditions required to achieve that type of growth. It's not, is the number 35, is it 33, is it 36? It's about what would be required to get to significant growth far enough out in the future that you're not constrained by, well, I only have 7 people in my department, or my budget is X, or whatever the case may be. And it has freed us up to now set a challenge of 35 million players in 2035. And the underpinnings of that are some of the things I've mentioned. We need more courts in America. There are not enough courts in the United States to support playing. And courts are a $100,000 construction project. We need probably in the ballpark of 50,000. That's billions. US Open makes a lot of money, but we can't fund that by ourselves. So how do we get resourceful? How do we take advantage of pickleball courts that are being built to get people playing a variant of tennis with red balls, which are softer and larger, and smaller rackets, but with strings, to get resourceful and use that? Recruiting more coaches. I say the term coach. For us, coach means everything from a volunteer mom and dad that might be in a little league dugout otherwise, up to a career professional, highly trained, compensated for working with elite athletes. We need more diverse coaches. People need to see themselves. We don't have enough women in the profession. We don't have enough people of color in the profession, yet that is what the composition of our sport looks like coming in. And then lastly, we've identified that our issue is not attraction. Any given year, whether I come to work or not, we will have 4 to 5 million people try tennis for the first time in that year. Our issue is 100 people try tennis. Over the course of a year, 98 people will leave the sport. That might be age. It may be you graduate from Penn, you go take a job somewhere, there's nowhere to play, you don't have a partner, you graduate high school, you come to college, you no longer play. For whatever reason, injury. We need to create new platforms, new programs that allow people to stay in the game. And our formats have been very rigid. USJ leagues, USJ sanctioned tournaments. We need more engaging formats. We need to modernize our approach to play so that 98% loss maybe looks something more like 80%. And I know we have some analysts and statisticians in the room. If your business is churning 80% of your customers every year, you've got a real problem, right? Your restaurant loses 80% of the customers who come in, don't come back, hard to sustain that business. If we can retain 80% of the people that come into our sport, it explodes. So that is where our focus.
Well, those are great visions and great goals, and you'll reach them because I know you. So how's your experience working under various notable leaders shaped your leadership style? Do you try to emulate anybody in particular?
I wouldn't point to anyone, but what I will point to is I'm a bit of a sponge. And I steal shamelessly, right, bits and pieces from the folks I interact with, the folks I work for, and try to adopt what works for me. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to lead, you've got to be authentic. People need to be able to connect with you on a human level and understand you. And so I take what's authentic to me. I'll give maybe the converse example. When I worked in management consulting, the head of our firm was extraordinary. And what a presenter, what a speaker. And when he would present, there was never a word on a slide. and you were just enthralled. You were fascinated. You would sit there and watch these presentations, and he looked like Dudley Moore, and he was funnier than Dudley Moore. And it was just like you felt like you were in the presence of somebody just brilliant and charismatic. I couldn't do it. I wanted to do it, but I could not carry that meeting that way. And so I would lift and steal where I could from things. The first boss I ever worked for, I was very fortunate, was a gentleman named Ed Abrain. He ran the golf division at Wilson Sporting Goods when I got hired, and Ed was very late in his career, had done a bunch of things, loved tennis, and this was a passion thing for him. And he invested a lot of time in me personally, but the takeaway I had from him was leave your desk every day feeling like you've done something to move the business forward. And not everything is huge, but come in every day with the mindset that I am going to contribute, leave the business better than you found it. I've worked for some incredibly effective salespeople. I've worked for some brilliant strategists. I learned the way you connected with our team and motivated our team. We would sit in the office up in White Plains, and you knew when Kat was in the building because the energy went up, because you would make the rounds and talk to everybody personally. You knew everybody by name. And that's never been lost on me. And I do laps around the office in Orlando now, trying to replicate some of the connections that you had with folks, because you saw how energizing it was and how inspired they are. So I try to steal bits and pieces wherever I find them, and then try to apply them to myself. And then I also think about how those things translate to the department and the organization, and how we want to present ourselves to the outside world. Do we come off as transparent? Do we come off as honest? Are we accessible, right? The same values that you ascribe to effective leaders, you'd love to be able to ascribe to organizations also.
Well, I think it's important that you have your own personality. You bring your own personality to the roles that you're in, and that people recognize that, as you move throughout your career. And so that's very key. And so in saying that, I also recognize that when I was at the USTA, that in your department in particular, that you were very focused on making sure that you had a lot of women in your department, and that you elevated them and made sure that they had key roles. Was that a key strategy of yours? And if so, why?
It wasn't a key strategy initially. I wasn't really conscious of it. I just wanted great colleagues and to bring in the best talent that we could
smart,
find.
They had great personalities, and they were energized.
And to think about and I love to see colleagues develop and give them attention and shine regardless. But what I did realize over time at the USTA, I became much more conscious of it, and you actually helped me become more conscious of this. What I realized is that we at the USDA had an extraordinary opportunity to attract better talent by actually narrowing the pipeline. So whereas I would we'd have job postings, it's like, why are we not, where are the Penn Wharton School grads? Why are they not applying for jobs with us? And they're applying for jobs at the NBA and the NFL. Why are they not here? And then I realized that, if we're not more specific about what we can provide and offer, and one of the things about tennis that's unique, tennis is the most successful dual gender sport anywhere on the planet of any scale. Every aspect of tennis in the USGA is equal. We've had equal prize money for 50 years, 51 years now. Tennis participation is 50-50. You've been a pioneer in this area, right? Tennis viewership is 50-50. A lot of what makes the business of the US Open so successful is we appeal equally to men and women. And I looked at that and said, that needs to be reflected in our workforce as well. And in many respects it was, because a lot of the senior leadership jobs in tennis were filled by women who had come through the industry, which is more balanced. But I looked at that and said, what a great opportunity to attract the best young talent and focus on, we can offer something to women who want to get into this industry that no other organization can offer. We can offer an opportunity to work alongside leaders in key roles. These weren't just the HR jobs and the communication jobs, right? These were our head of sponsorship, our head of broadcast, our head of ticketing, our chief marketing officer, you as chair of the board, our chief legal officer, our tournament director, right? So coming in, and Cindy would have seen this, coming into the organization, you have a chance to be surrounded by strong female leaders that are running businesses And for me, that became a formula to attract better talent, to retain better talent, and the work-life balance that we can offer that's much harder for teams to offer and leagues to offer became a competitive opportunity to attract the best women in sports, because my event is a 3-week window. You don't need to be in the arena 3 or 4 nights a week. You don't have 10-game homestands. And if you have a family, particularly a young family, those jobs get really challenging. The travel, the nights, things like. I can offer a work-life balance to an incredible woman in sports who wants to be in the industry that no one can match, and that became a competitive advantage, and we used it strategically. But for me, it didn't start intentional. I just wanted to attract great talent. And I'd love your observation on this. If I can make maybe a declarative statement, and it is changing. My experience professionally has been that, and again, not to just paint everyone with the same brush, women who do great work tend to focus more on the work and trust that the work will speak for itself. Men have historically been much more willing to do the networking and some of the other stuff that's required perhaps, or that helps them get ahead, and that is absolutely changing. But I love the opportunity to recognize people doing great work and give them the chance to grow.
Are y'all listening? Okay. So I know we're running short on time here, so I'm going to give you one final question before we open it up to the floor. So you and I were having a conversation before we came in here about you're going up to our New York office. We have several locations. Main campus at the national campus in Orlando. We have our New York City office. We have Queens out at the National Tennis Center, and then we have a small office in Westchester. Did I hit them all?
You hit them all.
Yeah. So in mentioning the New York office, you said, on Friday, I'll probably be the last one there. You'll often find you the last person in the office. When you were at Wilson, you were often the last person at the office. And so, given how the sports industry is today, what advice would you give these students here, who are going into this business and entering this space? Would you recommend them to be the last one in the office? I mean, living in our hybrid space now, with people not being in the office, would you recommend that? Has times changed, or is it still about getting down and dirty and showing that you're working hard?
I think times have changed. Showing that you're working hard has not changed, but I think there are different ways to do it. So for me, part of it was, and athletes talk about this a lot, and I'm using language now that I didn't have in my head then, but I've applied it. I wanted to be able to control the things that I could control, right? You can control for effort. So getting in early, staying late, I wanted to be productive. And I had colleagues that were faster, quicker thinkers, whatever. What worked for me, and even worked for me in college, was I needed to be sort of focused, sitting somewhere, right? And so things maybe, I'd like to spend more time on things than others, and so I stretched my day. But it wasn't so much about being there late. What I did do, and the point that I'll get to when I finish this story, what I did do is I never left the office at Wilson without doing a lap around. The way we were set up, we had all the cubicles were in the center and all the offices were on the exterior with the windows. Now it's all been flipped in corporate. But I would do a lap around our floor before I would leave. And if anyone was sitting in one of those offices, I would stick my head in and say, hey, before I leave for the night, I see you're still here. Is there anything I can help you with? And I would literally go office by office by office. Most of the people would be like, just get out of here. It became a joke. They'd see me coming. Just don't even bother. Just leave, whatever it was. But occasionally, someone would say, you know what? Could you help me with this? And that might have been something very mundane, making some copy, whatever it was. But occasionally, it was actually something that was meaningful. And it created opportunities for me to learn, to get connected to the senior leadership, and get exposure. And the lesson I would say for everybody is the gap between just being a good employee and separating yourself as exceptional is not that great. It's 5 or 10% additional effort. And so focus on how can I do great work and demonstrate that I'm open to doing a bit more, be positive, be engaging, do great work. But for me, I think it's not about the hours, it's about just separating yourself a little bit from everybody else. And it feels like it's a heavy lift. Oh, everyone's here at Ivy League schools, they're all great. It's actually not. The gap, and even with elite athletes, the gap that separates a Federer or a Serena from her isn't that great. But 3%, 4%, 5%, match after match, point after point, very different careers.
No, absolutely. That's awesome. So I want to open it up to the floor for some questions. Yes, sir.
Hey, how you doing? Lorenzo Barber, first year MBA.
Great.
A lot of discussion about growing the participation in tennis. You talked about how the business model is a little different from the team where you're focused on driving revenue and converting those spenders to bigger spenders. Why is that the focus, like growing the participation? And then what does the world look like where everyone plays tennis?
Yeah. Hopefully, I'll tell you what a world looks like where everyone plays tennis. It's a much healthier world. We promote tennis because tennis is an incredible way to improve people's health and by extension, improve communities. And so that is our focus. We are a nonprofit. We are a governing body that exists to grow the game, not to make money. The money is, I said, the bake sale that allows us to do it. But the reason tennis matters and the reason we matter is because tennis can improve people's health. It has been documented to be the sport or fitness activity that adds more years to longevity, 9.7 years to longevity versus a sedentary lifestyle than anything else. That includes swimming, cycling, running, any other sport. And there are lots of reasons for that. It's aerobic, anaerobic, interval training, your heart rate goes up, it comes down, and it's social. And we've now recognized that there are physical health benefits to emotional and mental wellness and having partners and being social. So that is why we do what we do. And that is our focus, right, as an organization. It's not about making money. Now, no mistake, those people who work on the US Open, in my old job, it was very much about making money, right? Because we were funding the organization. But when Kat leads a board meeting at the USTA, it starts with, are we growing participation? It doesn't start with the sexy business stuff. It starts with, how are we growing participation? That is the mission. And the Open can have extraordinary success. It is having unbelievable success right now. But if we're not moving the needle on participation, I'm not doing my job.
I saw a hand up top. Okay, over here. Did I see a hand up top? Okay, yes.
I want to know your opinion on pickleball. Is this a threat or opportunity?
Yeah, largely both. It's complicated, but here's the reality. We're a wellness organization. We want people to be healthy. If they're getting out and active playing pickleball, we would never say that's a bad thing. What I will tell you is if you look at the racket sports ecosystem, pickleball's growth, which is not coming from tennis players leaving for good, pickleball's growth is actually quite helpful. If I'm a teaching professional and I can teach both, and padel as well, if I can teach those sports and make a better living and we can attract better quality people into the industry, more into the industry, that helps everybody. It lifts the. If I'm a club and I have more members and my pro shop, my snack bar, my revenues are going up, that may help that club stay in business because tennis, the economics around a tennis facility with 2 players, 4 players on a court of that size, compared to the value of that real estate as a apartment complex, for example, we're getting squeezed out of more valuable real estate. So to the extent that helps, all additive. Where pickleball and tennis are in conflict is largely at the public parks, where decisions are being made while tennis is experiencing growth. It's a 40% lift in player participation in 5 years, enormous growth. We're experiencing growth, but it's so much cheaper to repaint a tennis court than build the 2 new pickleball courts that should be built. We're making decisions that are not, again, in the public space, that are not informed by data. They're informed by just noise. We don't have pickleball courts, we need pickleball courts. When women's softball became popular, you didn't see baseball fields going away, you saw softball fields being built. If pickleball courts were being built, everybody benefits. But when we lose tennis courts and tennis players have fewer places to play, that's the challenge. So figuring out how we work together to preserve all of those courts. And now for me, the converse. How do we use the tens of thousands of pickleball courts that will be built in coming years to support tennis play, red ball tennis play, smaller rackets, larger, softer ball that will get more people playing as beginners and also become a more social version of the sport.
Okay, one up here and then down here.
Hi. Tennis is different from other sports in one aspect, which is the absence of teams. There have been some experiments over the years with that concept. Why hasn't that taken? Do you see that as part of tennis's future and the formation of even leagues and teams as a way to grow consumer interest in this sport?
You're right. I would say golf also is sort of as an individual sport. It's a challenge. There are some team formats. They've been they haven't gotten the adoption that the individual play. I think people like stars and focus on that. If you know, a team sport where you're all competing on the pitch at the same time is very different than a team sport where wrestling, for example, where you're on a team but you're never actually playing together. I will also say the economics of tennis are different because you don't have that team aspect. So if you think of basketball, you have team affinity, college sports, team affinity, and player individual affinities. Because we don't have that team affinity piece, which drives huge economics in licensing and merch and your team jerseys and things like that, it's hard. But I think you're kind of forcing when you know, we have Davis Cup and Billie Jean King Cup, but when you take a competition that is not a team competition and try to make it a team event, I think you've got some challenges there because the teams aren't playing together on the same field at the same time.
Hi, I loved your comments, your positive comments about college tennis.
Yes.
And it sounded a lot like you had something to say about NIL in tennis in particular. And I think we'd all like to hear your comments about what's going on with that. Just one example I heard, even though it's a non-revenue sport, Duke now has an actual collective.
Yes.
Which is a part of it was just the cash, and they just poached like a big top player from another school. So whatever you want to tell us about NIL, I'm sure everybody would be interested.
You know, if there's anyone in this room that has certainty on what NIL is going to mean for college sports, they're the only one. No one knows. I spend more time with athletic directors, college tennis coaches, trying to get a sense of what it means, because college tennis going away not only has profound implications for potential professionals, it will have big implications for youth participation. As a family, if you make a decision or children make decisions about what sports they want to play, if there is no pathway into college, what does that mean for youth participation? So here's what I will tell you. I think crisis creates opportunity. I look at it now and say, there is an opportunity, and we have resources and money. There is an opportunity, perhaps, where the USTA might support college tennis and certainly look at ways to support athletes going through that pathway. And now schools can perhaps accept, or coaches or players can accept some of that funding. Does that create an opportunity for us? But ultimately, what happens with football will drive, and to a much lesser extent basketball, will drive how much funding is left over for everyone else, and which schools decide to continue to offer college. And with Title IX and everything else, look, the fact that we are gender neutral and women's teams are as strong as men's teams in the college space. But I don't know what the answer is, but I know we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how we can make sure that there is a pathway there and that we can support it.
Got to get my girl in.
Yes.
Got one more.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm also a first-year MBA student. I'm curious, I know you mentioned the scale of the U.S. Open, right? It's a much shorter tournament, and especially you coming from MSG, the Knicks, the Rangers, that's a much longer season. So curious how you personally might have had to adjust to a much smaller kind of in-season period. Yeah,
I have a lot of Hampton Inn LaGuardia Airport points. I think I spent 35 nights at the Hampton Inn LaGuardia. It's a very different pace, right? It's focused energy when we're there, but you're planning a year for one event. which is very different than the rhythm at an MSG, for example, where you're chasing deals, right, at all times. The cycle just never ends, even though the season on the business side, it never really ends. For us, we are heavily planning right now for next year. You see the impact of that. It's much more like when I was in brand management, consumer product launches, and every year is a new launch for us. We build to it, we execute, we learn, we plan again.
Lou, thank you very much. And thank you all. This has been a pleasure. Awesome.